Part 2 of this tutorial series is finally here, and we will finally be opening our first window and poking through the code to understand how it works. These videos will be all dedicated to handling this window, because we want to turn it into a game. So I will not only talk about the WinAPI stuff, but also about the game dev specific topics when making a game from scratch, like properly calculating the delta time, setting up your project, and others. Today though, let's open our window. If you haven't watched part 1 and you are lazy, I recommend watching at least day 0 and day 10 so you know the basic Windows API and window things. So last video I talked about some things related to Windows, and I hinted that in order to create a window you have to also keep it alive. Basically, many things can happen to a window. Like, it can get moved, it can get resized, or it can get input. Windows will record those events in order into a queue. And you have to read those events from the queue and decide what to do with them using a callback. So basically, you have to constantly tell the window to read the messages that it receives from Windows. If you don't do that, the events will queue up until eventually Windows will guess that the program froze in an infinite loop or something, and after giving it a few seconds time to recover, it will give you the option to terminate the program. And we will see that shortly, and it will make much more sense. So to open a window, you have to call create window A. Easy enough, except it isn't that easy because you have to do two more things before that. But stay with me. First, we have to create that callback that I talked about. This will get called for any event that the window receives. And again, an event can be something like resizing or even creating or destroying the window. So the first parameter is a handle to our window. Remember from the last video, HWND is just a handle to a window. The second parameter is the message, and there are many messages that our window can receive. The final two parameters are extra stuff that we will look at in another video. Okay, so this is how I like to structure my WinProc. I do a big switch on the message type. For now, we will just handle the close message, and we will just close our program. And yes, that also means that you can choose not to do anything and you get that message. We'll see that in a second. Now, there are many messages that we can get, and we need to handle all of them for the window to work. Some of them need to return specific things from this function. So in the default case, we will just call def-winproc, that just stands for default Windows procedure. Now we can just return the result. Now this window stuff here is actually a struct that will hold all the window relevant data. For now, it will be a global variable, but stop spamming hate comments. It will be like this only for a few videos. I'll show you how to get rid of it later. For now, it just holds a boolean telling if the window is running or not. If you are lost now, don't worry. At the end of the video, I'll start poking individual bits of this function to demonstrate how it influences the opening of the window. So right now, just pay attention. And by the way, you should also type all this code in a new project by hand to better learn these things. Okay, not so bad. Now one more thing before we can create our window. We need to create a window class. This is like a style for the window, but not in how it looks, more like in how it behaves. You will see in a second what do I mean by that. So we create this big struct, and I use this trick that I told you about in day 0 to initialize its members. And you watched the previous videos to this one, haven't you? Next I have to specify that I want a default cursor for our window. Yes, we have to specify a lot of things. Passing no cursor, we'll use the last one. And yes, there are other options for the cursor. Then we need to pass an instance to our process. We can just call getModuleHandle to get it. Now we need to pass the class name. This will be used to refer to it later, and there are some pre-existing ones like for buttons and stuff, but we won't use those. Now we tell Windows that we want this window to refresh when we resize it horizontally or vertically. Yes, we have a lot of control here. You can even add a shadow to your window from here. Like, there are a lot of things to dig into the documentation, but anyway, the last thing we passed is the window proc we have just created. Now we have to call the register class to associate these settings with the class name that we have provided. We will use this class name to specify the settings to our window. Kinda weird, but there is probably a reason for all of this. Now let's open our window. The first parameter is the class name, and we have just talked about that, so I'll just paste this. Next, the window title. Now we have to specify the window styles, and there are many options. I mentioned them in the last video, but overlapped window is just a default window, and I also specify visible so we can see our window. This is not on by default, so you can do your initialization first before you open your window, but we want to see it right away for now. Next, we specify the window position and size, but I'll just pass this parameter to say that I want Windows to just give me a default position and size. Next parameter is a parent. We don't have that. Next is a menu. We don't want that. Next is again a handle to the instance of this program. We pass getModule handle. And the last parameter will just be 0 for now. We'll use it in another video. And now we have our window. The last thing is to keep it alive. So we need to tell it to listen to the messages received from Windows. So we'll make an infinite while. Here we'll write the game code in the future. This while will eventually close when the window is closed. And we can do that by looking at the running flag created earlier. Now to get the message, you can call getMessage, but this function waits for a message to be sent to the window before returning, essentially blocking our game's update. We still want to update our game, even if we don't get new messages, so we will use pickMessage. And we will call it inside the loop to get all of the new messages. The first parameter is the message. The second one is the window. Then we have the option to filter what messages we want. And finally, we tell it to remove the message from the queue. Now this function's return type is not actually a bool, and can return negative numbers on failure, so we will have to check if it is greater than 0. If so, we have to handle that message. To do so, we call these two functions that will essentially call our callback for the current message. How do they work though? Let's recap a little first, so you understand this better. This while is our game loop, and here we will later update the screen with the game content and stuff. In order for Windows to communicate things to our window, it will send its events, and those events will fill up a queue. If that queue is filled too much, that means that we aren't responding to those events, so our program might be stuck in an infinite loop or something. This line takes messages from that queue, and here we process them. Dispatch message will basically just call the callback that we have created to handle the events, and we are responsible for handling them, as you'll see shortly. Now many messages will actually go directly to your window callback without you calling this stuff. But that doesn't mean you can just ignore these lines. Messages that go through this code here are keyboard related things, for example, and what translate message does is to convert keyboard messages into WM_char messages. Essentially, you have to call this function so your messages are interpreted properly later. Now yes, that is a lot, but now we get to the fun part. If we open our program, we can see that the window has opened. Let's poke to this code together to understand better how it works. And this will actually be also your homework for many of these videos, because we will build each day on top of the one before. So I don't want to give you tasks to implement parts that we'll be using later as your homework. Okay, so if you paid attention, you probably realized that since we have a default window callback, we can just pass it here, instead of making our own. And we can totally do that, but of course that also means that we can control stuff about it later. Next, I want you to think about what would happen if we remove this class here. Will closing the window still work? Well, yes, because the message will just be handled here. What if we do nothing in this case instead? What will happen? Well, the window won't close. We actually have to call a close window here for it to close. The reason it closed in the first place here is because we are closing our entire program by setting this flag to false. Okay, what if we add this message box here? We will get this nice pop-up to ask us if we want to close the window. Now, a keen observer will notice that while this pop-up is on, the window can receive updates, because we are blocking our program here. Message box returns only after you close it. So it seems like we still can move the window around because, as I mentioned, some events go directly into the callback. You can also try to close it multiple times, and you have to click all of them in order for it to work. If you however print something in the main loop, you will easily see that this event will block your program. A fix to this is to make our window a parent to this pop-up, making Windows not allow you to use the parent window until you handle the message box. Last thing I want to show you. So if you don't call this code, Well, the window will be stuck, as expected, because you don't handle the messages. Also, if you call it properly but not handle the message properly, the window won't open because some messages expect you to return certain things when the window is created, to signal that everything worked. Don't forget to search stuff online. Also, I have just released my Steam game, and initially, it also had the window opening code written by me. But for that, we have to learn more things. Next video is window input.